I will turn this over to Mr. Keith Cunningham of the GAO, who spent 22 years focusing on federal real property management and telecommunications issues. Thank you there, Keith.
Thanks, Ken. It's almost 23 years, if you can believe that. Okay, so thanks for having me. I don't know how long ALN has been doing these annual forums, but however many number that is, that's how many I've participated in. I am a founding attender of these and love them every year. I just have a few things that I'm going to do today. I'm going to share my screen, if fingers crossed. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little different. First of all, I'm going to look at my building, which I miss very much. I've also only been to my building once in the last 7 months. I'm going to talk a little bit about current issues in federal facilities. I've talked a lot about the reports we've done recently, and maybe you've heard me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we see happening in real property right now and what we're thinking about it. Most of this comes from our high risk series. This is a report. This is kind of one of our signature reports that comes out every 2 years. People should get a physical checkup every year, but we give the federal government a physical checkup every 2 years. Our high risk report is the 30 odd some issues in the federal government that are at the highest risk for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And since 2003, federal real property management has been on that list. That's almost since the beginning. We focus on 4 big issues, and I'm going to talk about what's happening currently in those issues. First one is excess and underutilized property. Long-standing issue. The federal government has more property than it needs. A couple things that we're looking at. RTF stands for reduce the footprint. This is goes back to the Obama administration. In 2015, the goal was to freeze the footprint, and then every year after that, reduce the footprint. And it's been so it's been 5 years, and that's about how long it was supposed to be. So as you can look at my graphic here, the first year really good, and then each year since then, not so good. And so we're looking at 2019, and I'm concerned that this trend will continue, and the focus on getting rid of excess and underutilized property has kind of it's fallen into the background. Another thing that's new since our last report is the Public Buildings Reform Board. The Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act of 2016 created a board, which then sat around for over a year until at least some of the members had been appointed by President and Congress. It did get constituted. They created a list of a dozen or so high value properties approved by OMB, and those properties are currently being disposed of. Those could get the government up to $500 million in revenue that then the board could use or is supposed to use for future rounds of facility reductions. So between reduce the footprint and it's now handing over to the Public Buildings Reform Board, how this board does will be critical to this issue with GAO moving forward. Probably the number one thing in excess and underutilized property. Next up is issues in leasing. So since the beginning, GAO has found that the federal government relies far more on leasing than it should. We're talking about large, stable space needs that would be better served if they were owned, particularly from a cost standpoint. I'll have an example of that in a second. So since 2019, a couple of big developments have occurred. The first one is the picture of the Department of Transportation headquarters building. This was the poster child of poor real property management. We leased it for more than a dozen years and then bought it at market price. This building, I don't know if you're in the DC area, you know this very well if you go to Nationals, Washington Nationals ball games or DC United soccer games, because it's right in that area. When the federal government started leasing it, none of those things were there. It was kind of a rundown part of the city. So if we just bought it then, we could have bought it for, we could have bought the land, we already had the land, and built the property for under $300 million. And now we've spent over $2 billion renting and purchasing it. You can see why leasing isn't always the best strategy. Another thing is GSA has started under Dave Matthews, the Public Buildings Commissioner, has started a lease cost avoidance plan. And his plan is to save $4.7 billion in a number of strategies, shrinking the footprint of leases, moving leases from leased to owned properties, consolidating leases, and negotiating longer deals, which should be at a lower rate. We're looking at right now the first couple of years of implementation of that plan to see if those savings are actually being materialized. Our third of four issues that we always look at is data reliability. Our DHS friends talked about the need for good data to support decision making, and it's been a problem across the federal government since 2003. A couple things we're looking at this year. So we had a big report come out this year on the data, and the news was not good. One of the big things we found is just something as simple as the address of where buildings and structures are was very bad. We found over half of the addresses were either incomplete or incorrectly formatted, meaning they couldn't be read by a computer. So this is a big problem. This gives an example of one. Goddard Space Flight Center, anybody in the DC area probably visited. It has 215 buildings in it, and they are all located in the database as being just at Greenbelt Road. So Greenbelt Road is a 6.3 long road. It's very urban. And if you type that into Google or most computers, it'll just get you the center point, which is shown here on this map. And as you can see, it's over a mile from the main entrance. We asked NASA why they don't include a more specific address, and they said it was for security reasons. But the problem is if you type Goddard Space Flight Center into Google, you're going to find the exact address. And a map to the entire facility, actually. So it's not really a very good security if that's the reason. So what the federal government does to address the data reliability issues that we've found time and time again will help tell the tale of what we find for our 2021 report. The other big question related to the data is, what about DoD? As you can see here, DoD is the lion's share of real property holdings. So how their data goes is almost entirely how the federal government's data goes. And unfortunately, for the last several years, DoD's data has not been sufficiently reliable for OMB to use in its database or in tracking costs. So how DoD goes will also help us decide what we rate this in 2021. The last issue, which I didn't go over, was security. That's usually for a different audience. Security will come down to almost exclusively how the Federal Protective Service manages its contract guards. We found that the contract guards often don't have the right training to stand the post that they're standing, and DHS has been working on this for a long time. And they're finally rolling out a new training system and a new way of monitoring that the guards have the right training. How that turns out will also determine how security turns out for the federal government. All the stuff I'm talking about will culminate in just a couple months in February 2021, when the pandemic is gone and we're all back at work. We're going to come out with our new high risk list, and at that time we'll determine whether federal property will remain on the list, or whether all those issues that I just described will all be corrected and we'll remove it from the list. And I can't tell you for sure which it'll be, but most people could probably surmise. And with that, that's all I have to present.